I was born Arlinda Mesa, and I was born in Monahans, Texas. And I grew up in the 50s, uh, in the middle of a lot of, segregation, a lot of discrimination. And my family went through a lot. They went through a lot as far as discrimination in Monahans, Texas. I still remember the fact that in those days they did the red line, the redlining. You couldn't move into certain neighborhoods. Because my dad looked like me, or I looked like my dad, people would pass him as an Anglo. And at one point, my mother said, I want to move into a new home. They're over here on this side of town. So she went to a builder and asked, would you sell me this home? And he says, your money's good as mine. Because she did look Hispanic. And so she went home and told my dad, she said, you know what? I want to buy that house. And he goes, well, I'll go to the bank and see if they'll sell it. Well, they thought he was white. And they sold him the house. And we ended up being the first family to live in the red line area where they weren't supposed to sell to Hispanics. Being the fact that my mom wanted us to not be discriminated against, that she wanted us to live a good life, she ended up doing the opposite. Because being the only Mexican family in that neighborhood caused more discrimination towards us. We had to go to white schools, which they all knew we were Mexican, and we got discriminated against. It was just the opposite. And so my whole life was basically, and my sister and brother, that we all had to fight discrimination all of our lives. So when this story came out, and I found out that my great-grandfather had been massacred by the Texas Rangers, it made me angry. I could not believe that had happened to our family. And then to this day, still having to fight discrimination.
You have a very interesting story about how that came about, how you found out about your great-grandfather. I think you were at some social gathering, some social activity where one of your relatives started to talk about your great-grandfather. And I think I remember you saying, no, this isn't true. This didn't really happen. And tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a social gathering. It was my dad's funeral. He died, and afterwards you have where everybody comes over and eats. And at that point, my great uncle, I'm not great uncle, my uncle John, my dad's brother, told us, hey, I have a story for you, and it's time that I tell it. And so he told us the story of the Texas Rangers killing our great-grandfather. And of course, growing up in the 50s and loving the Lone Ranger and knowing that the Texas Rangers were heroes, I said, no, that's not true. That can't be true. They're supposed to be protectors, not killers. And he says, no, they killed our great-grandfather. In fact, they killed 15 men that night. So my sister and I started doing genealogy, and at that point, we did come across the Porvinian Massacre. And the first thing we noticed was our great-grandfather's name. And then to top it off, they had one deposition in there of one of the wives, and it was my great-grandmother, Juana. Her deposition was online, and it just crushed me. I could not believe first. It was just so sad. I did. I cried. I let my family know, and then I became angry. Then I became upset that they had hidden this, because they did. They tried to hide it. They tried to say that they were the bandits, that they were the ones that were firing at them, and then to come to find out that they had been stripped of all weapons 3 days before. They didn't have a way to fight back.
Right.
It was just a total massacre.
So
I need to take this clock out.
Okay. Do we need to start over?
no,
Okay.
Just ask the question.
So Arlinda, one of the things I wanted to ask you, you talked about discrimination and racism in the 1950s, and it seems like you were abundantly aware of this, and you gave us a great story here. And then you hear something about your great-grandfather in the Porvinian Massacre. Talk to us a little bit about how you transitioned. You were angry, you were upset, you were mad that people had not really disclosed this information. How did your life change, really? I mean, you're a very passionate person to let people know about the Porvinian Massacre and some of the... Did your attitudes change? Did your life... I mean, obviously your attitudes about the Rangers changed some. So what happened? That as a catalyst.
Well, when we found out, when I found out, like I said, it was a string of emotions. You are very sad that happened, and then you become angry, and then it becomes, what am I going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I did. In fact, I said, we've got to get this out. Everyone has to know this happened, because people did not know. Mm-hmm. And so I started working really hard on trying to find as much information as I could about the massacre. And with my sister's help, we started working on our genealogy. And we started working out of the Sul Ross State University archives. And we found a lot of things. And that's when we came across Harry Warren's his notes mm-hmm. on the massacre. And then I started connecting with people that had known about it. And I started calling them, talking to them, writing them, emailing them, and just trying to find as much as I could. And then I found people that really wanted to help me get this out. So we started working with, I wanted to get a marker up, and I found a lot of roadblocks there.
Okay.
And so I couldn't get that done, and they kept saying, "No, we can't do it." And so then I decided, well, the 100th birthday was coming up, and that's when I decided, you know what, this is the time for me to do something, and let's do it big. And so I had a friend, and that was the Senator Rodriguez, and I called him up and I said, do you think we could get the Capitol to let us do the centennial? And he said, let me try. And sure enough, with everyone, we had so many people helping us. And Andrew Chapter was doing a documentary at that time, and he was all for it. And he said, we'll do it. Mm-hmm. And so we just started trying to find families of each of the family members that lost someone. Now, that's been very difficult to do. There's still a couple of men that were killed that we still cannot find any family. But the majority of them, we did find some. So we were able to do the centennial in Austin in 2018. And it turned out, they told us this will hold 400 people. And the auditorium would hold 400 people. And I said, oh, we're not going to have 400 people. There's no way. I said, if the most, maybe 100. That's what I was hoping for. And sure enough, that day, we had standing room only.
Wow.
And so it really meant a lot to us that a lot of people are interested in this story.
Right. I spoke with Chris Tomlinson just the other day, Forget the Alamo. And the first thing that hit me, he's a Texan, how dangerous that might be, writing a book called Forget the Alamo in Texas. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you about, if you're going after the Texas Rangers, or you're divulging new information, or you're chronicling the atrocities and stuff like that, were you being challenged? Was this a difficult project to undertake in Texas?
Yes. The Texas Rangers, they have a museum of their famous Rangers. Mm-hmm. It's called the Hall of Fame of Rangers. And some of their people that they have there are not good people. Mm-hmm. Frank Hammer's one of them.
Sure.
And he's the one who threatened the legislator that actually brought it all to Austin to have a trial on the Porvinian Massacre. and all the atrocities that went on in Texas. But he threatened him, and he just wasn't a good guy.
Right.
And the first thing people have told me is you really need to go after the Texas Rangers. And I said, yeah, I do believe we need to do that as far as their museum. They need to update their museum to where it tells the truth, not all these, because there are a lot of lies in the museum. So I've been working on that, and a lot of people have asked me. They said, so you must hate the Rangers. And my answer to them is always, I don't hate the Rangers. The Rangers today, I believe, is a good organization. And I would never hold any person, how can I say it? I would never hold them responsible for their father's sins.
Right.
That's just not right.
Right.
So my thing is, okay, we can't change the past, but we can definitely tell the truth about it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm going for. The Texas Rangers in their museum, they need to change things and make it right. And they've told me personally that they are trying to make things right. And I had some input into it. And they said that they would take that into consideration. So I'm just waiting to see what they do. If they still don't do it, I'll be the first person to tell you.
Okay. If I were to ask you kind of like what your dream is, you've talked about Porvinian Massacre. I think it's important for the audience to understand we were talking about men and boys and 15 being killed at Porvinian, and many people being stripped of their weapons. I believe you were referring to J.T. Canales, that kind of investigation to some of the abuses there. But if you move forward and you've obviously made people much more aware of what happened at Porvinian and what the Texas Rangers had done, in your dream of dream or your world of world kind of moving forward, what do you want to happen because of what you discovered and the way you're distributing this kind of information? What would you like to see moving forward?
Well, I guess a lot of people would say it's just something I'm never going to get. But we need to look at our society. We have to quit thinking people are better than others. Discrimination is alive and well. Everyone knows that. But a lot of people won't accept it. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see that people can live in this world without ever having to deal with discrimination. Oh yeah, I can't. I know I can't do that. Mm-hmm. But I would love to see us at least get better at what we're doing right now. It's just horrendous at the things that I'm hearing. What happened here in El Paso? That was pure hate. Mm-hmm. That was pure hate of a race. We just can't do that. We just can't live that way. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to love each other. And I know it's hard.
It is hard, but I think you got to dream, the dream. I had a wonderful conversation with Ramon Vasquez with the Tapilam Nation. And when you ask the Tapilam Nation, what they want inclusion. All they want to do is to be part of the story. If you want to talk about the Alamo, include them. If you want to talk about the Alamo, put in Tejanos. If you want to talk about other individuals, include them. And I think it scares me a great deal, particularly as a historian, that we try to whitewash the history of the past. And I hear this all the time. Oh, we don't want kids to suffer because of the past, and we don't want them to hear about slavery and the institution of racism. With my students, they love to hear the truth. I think they can handle it. They like to be challenged. I know my own lectures become better lectures when I bring other people in. If I could bring this lecture to my students and said, oh my God, this lady found out about her great-grandfather. The Texas Rangers were vaunted. People thought the greatest things about the Texas Rangers, and then all of a sudden, there's a great deal of critique about it, the discrimination that takes place, and then that really resonates with my students. They feel empowered, and I always like to think of almost like a festering sore of racism, that when you don't include other people, they're very angry, and they're very bitter. And yet when you turn that around and you start to include people and say, hey, we're going to cover the Alamo, and we're going to include indigenous people, and we're going to look at Tejanos in that, and we're going to look at mythology. Let's look at Texas mythology, the creation myth, the Alamo myth, the other things, that people really like that. And I think if we're going to heal, I agree with all your sentiments here, that if we are going to heal, if we're going to do, we have to respect each other. We have to respect our connections. And I think one of the things we see all the time is this dehumanization of people. There's a very famous person that I interviewed. His name is Porvinian. And one of the things that he taught me was, the minute you label somebody, you stop thinking. You dehumanize them. You don't open your ears. You're not paying attention to what their story. Personally, if someone told me, well, at the Alamo, there were a lot of indigenous people that were included there. There were a lot of Tejano people, there were a lot of Anglo people. I find the story richer. I enjoy the story a lot more, and instead of kind of leaving people out. So I applaud you for dreaming and hoping that it will come. Another thing I want to ask you too, to me, and I apologize, I'm an outsider. I'm a Californian, and there are things about Texas I don't quite understand. Of course, as an academic, I'm a history professor. We have our hurdles in the Board of Trustees and the state government, and things that that a lot of professors would not go along with. We have our hurdles, but I think it would be great, with your knowledge about Porvenir and enlightening people about that this would be taught across the curriculum, and this would be in all the high school classes. Is that something that we can't do in Texas?
Not with our Texas legislature. We can't. They just passed House Bill 3979, which is basically you can't teach anything without having a pro to it. Like, for instance, you got to teach the pro and the cons of the Holocaust. That's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that. The Alamo, you look at that, you got to do the pros and the cons of the Alamo. Whatever you're going to teach, you cannot teach something without looking at the pros and the cons of each one. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, but there are historical stories that do not have a pro. It's totally, the massacre that happened at Porvinian, there is no pro to that. The Texas Rangers massacred 15 men and boys. There's nothing good about that. And I'm the first one to say it. But in Texas, it's unbelievable what they're passing. That's what I've been fighting right now. Right. Is I wrote a letter to the legislature. I signed up to speak to them about it. I'm still working to try to get Texas from being so. I feel discriminatory. Mm-hmm. It is, and it's sad that the legislature believes that they need to tell teachers what to teach in their classrooms.
When politicians start telling us teachers what to do, we're done. We are absolutely done. We stop challenging our students, including the information. And as I said, the healing, it doesn't take place. This is something that really, really has to happen.
Let me add this. In my life, not only just personal, but in my daily work, I'm constantly fighting the legislature on everything that they have to say as far as education is concerned because of my job. and that is I'm a union president for educators, and I'm constantly fighting for them to stay out of the classroom. They've got to stay out of the classroom.
Yeah. I want to put a couple things to you. You know, I have written an article, finished the article, and the kind of argument that I looked at, that I was very interested in the El Paso Massacre, where many scholars said that the El Paso Massacre was not an aberration. Many Hispanic scholars in particular, it's not an aberration. And what I wanted to do, if it's not an aberration, it's not a one-off, that I wanted to go back in history and see if I could chronicle racism, the racialization of Latinos, you know, in the past. So that's one of the things that I started to do. I began in 1821 with the Mexican land grants. I would talk about Stephen F. Austin coming into Tejas. I would go through the usual, the Battle of the Alamo, the Battle of Goliad, the Mexican-American War, and then, you know, really through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And it is my belief that if you were looking for the glue that brings all of these historical things together, it is white supremacy. And I understand that white supremacy means different things to different people, and it evolves in different ways. But I can look at Arnaldo de Leon's, they called them greasers, and see, as the Anglos started to come in, this preoccupation with color, as these people in Mexico were, you know, described as having copper skin, brown skin, golden skin, swarthy cinnamon, black. I actually had to look. I knew what jet black was as far as a description. I didn't know where jet came from. What do they mean when jet, you know, jet? What's the origins of this? This preoccupation with color. If there's any word, without a doubt, slam dunk, that I've seen more than any other one from Texians, people that were coming into Tejas and stuff, is the word mongrel. Without a doubt. I mean, I haven't counted how many times, but the mixed bloods. And we were talking a little bit about Reginald Horseman's book, this kind of transition from Anglo-Saxonism, and it's almost kind of romantic vision of good old England and the common law and statutory law and maybe colonization, but somewhat in a positive sense, that this is Anglo-Saxon tradition. And yet in the 1820s and 1830s, as Reginald Horseman started to talk about, this Anglo-Saxonism it became a virulent racism. And what I mean by the racism, there was clearly a pecking order. I mean, it was almost written out. At the very top are white people, and then you kind of go down in color. And then you'd find the peons of Mexico at the bottom. But if you look at the Sam Houston or John C. Calhoun or Stephen F. Austin, I mean, a lot of different people, that word mongrel is used again. And you would hear people say at the time, like a Sam Houston and others, why would we ever let a mongrel race rule white people? So for me, I see the white supremacy there. And I see it continue, you know, throughout history, and you know, we get to something like the El Paso Massacre, and I have read that manifesto on many occasions. It's only 4 pages long,
right?
But I've read it 20 times because I see something different every time I see it. And one of the things that I picked up very early on in the manifesto, almost from the very beginning, where Patrick Crucius talks about my Texas, my America. All right, and this fact that he is defensive. He is not the instigator. All right, he's not the violent aggressor. It's the Mexicans who are the violent aggressors, who are trying to take his culture and his dignity away. And the reason I bring this up here, it's almost like the idea of who belongs in Texas and who doesn't. You know, Crucius didn't care if you were a Mexican American. That was legal. That wasn't important to him. I would argue that El Paso, and I said this, was the choice of El Paso was as premeditated as the murders. He knew why he was driving 10 hours. All right, he could have killed a Mexican or a Mexican American where he lived, but he knew what the percentage, what the population of Hispanics were, you know, there. So the kind of question that we're looking at, kind of an examination, can you look, I mean, in your opinion, the El Paso Massacre Can you look back and see the antecedents that go all the way back to perhaps Porvenir or La Matanza, or going back to the early period? Do you think that there's a consistent, if you connect the dots, that white supremacy is the thing that connects the dots there?
Oh, definitely, definitely. White supremacy is very it's alive and well, and even more right now. They don't care. Who knows whether they're white supremacists or not? But the fact that El Paso, it's just known that El Paso is 80% Hispanic, if not more.
Yeah.
And if you want Mexicans Americans of Mexican descent, this is the place to come.
Sure.
And so when he got in his car and was driving, he knew that he was going to find a lot of them here, and he didn't have to go very far to kill a lot of them.
Sure.
And that's why he did it.
And the other thing, it was at the end of a summer, break. You had a lot of people coming over from Juarez, getting all their shopping in. And the other thing that needs to be there, El Paso Juarez, it is a border community, and he knew it was a border community. So
exactly.
That way he could rail against the people that were crossing the border on it. And it was so premeditated because he canvassed the Walmart. And he looked at it. He knew what was going on. And he got a meal. And then after he got the meal, he came back and he told police, I came here to kill Mexicans.
That's right.
I came here to kill Mexicans. Now, this leads me into another thing that I want to say, about that. I watched the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, give a press conference. And in the press conference, he started off talking about mental health. It was about mental health. It was a lone wolf person. The other thing that I take on, I don't like this at all, was the attitude. He was an outsider. As if to say that nobody that was a white supremacist in El Paso could have done this. We need some different kind of gun rules. And as he was saying all of this stuff, and I've watched the video many times, I really have watched it. Robert Moore, journalist, came out there and he called out and he said, "Can we talk about the 800-pound gorilla that is in this room?" And he purposely, and I really paid attention to the video, to circumvent the governor and talk to Congresswoman Veronica Escobar and say, "Listen, what is going on? Can we talk about the elephant in the room?" And she said that this was a person, she did say outsider too, who came to do us harm. This was a hate crime against people of color, and laid it out. And I think part of my story is not just chronicling the racism, which I believe, I've been able to chronicle it. And there's more work to be done. There's much more racism that we can chronicle, but I've chronicled the racism. But in addition to that, it's the whitewashing that really upsets me. And I want to just read you a little quote from a colleague of mine, I said a fellow historian, what he has to say, just so you can focus on this. His name is David Dorado Romo, and he was talking about this whole thing. It said, and I'll go back, many conservative Republican politicians ascribe the causes of the massacre to mental health, video games, lone wolf extremists, and new gun laws that might have been responsible for the attack. So David Dorado Romo, who is from El Paso, he's an expert on El Paso. I mean, he literally knows the streets and stuff. Talks about living in a war zone all the time. And he said you just get used to it. It's almost like white noise. After a while, you just know until you get some horrible cataclysmic thing that has taken place out here. But what he said is that none of these assertions, and he's talking about the conservative, white politicians, and I'm quoting David, but none of these assertions addressed even remotely the root causes of the massacre, only the symptoms. All right? He argued that white supremacy is something that we've had to deal with for decades.
It was painful to watch leaders like Governor Greg Abbott and El Paso Mayor Dee Margo blame the shooting on mental illness and argue that this atrocity was committed by an outsider. It was just another way of whitewashing, but this was a white crime against people of color.
I do believe that I would categorize him as an outsider. And let me tell you why. That is because this is my Texas more than it is his. Because remember, my ancestors were here way before his. And remember, the border crossed us, not the other way around. So as far as Texas, this is my Texas. It is the Mexicans are the ones that own Texas. And for him to say, oh, it's my Texas and we're taking over, no, he's so wrong on that aspect. I do believe that when he came here, it was totally to kill people other than the color he was. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with what
David Romo.
Mr. Romo had said.
Right.
And it's true. When you have Abbott saying it was some kind of mental illness, then, boy, do we have a lot of mental ill people in this country. And we need to get them help. No, it's totally farce. It is discriminatory. They are white racist. Not white racist, I'm sorry. They actually want to make this country totally white. They don't want any color in this country. And they're going to do whatever they can to make it happen. And we're going to have to stand up and say no more.
Right. There's a couple things here. In addition to looking at the manifesto of Patrick Cruces, I looked at the people that influenced him in racist, alt-right manifestos. And there's a theme. I mean, they're different in their different ways. Somebody's killing Jews, somebody's killing Muslims, somebody's killing Mexicans. But there's a theme, and the theme is white replacement and white genocide. Patrick Cruces said at first, until he read about white replacement, Mexicans were not his target. But after he read what was coming out of New Zealand in the mosque, killings, and what was coming out of San Diego with the Jews and Pittsburgh with things like that, that started to change. So there seems to be this incredible fear factor, the browning of America.
That's right.
The demographics are changing drastically. And again, I want to repeat what I already said, that what these white supremacists, these alt-right people that have written these manifestos are talking about here, is they all see themselves as defenders. They are defenders. It's almost laughable. We're not the instigators. All right, we're not the aggressors. We're not going on the offensive here. What we're doing is we're defending our culture and our replacement and our identity and wherever else it is that they're talking about. So that seems to be very, very consistent with the people. This great fear. I've looked at Charlottesville. Jews will not replace us. You will not replace it. They know that the demographics there's a real fear of the white replacement, and I see that as one of the big connections there that links all of those people together.
Yep.
Yeah. John Moran Gonzalez.
Yes.
And Monica Munoz Martinez. It's a little bit hard alliteration to get that out there, but they've been very influential on me, and I know that you are friends with Monica and know about that. But I want to share from Monica's book, and The Injustice Never Leaves You, that one of the things that really, the first time I read it, stayed with me. I mean, it really blew me away, and I had to repeat it again, was state-sponsored or state-sanctioned violence. And I actually stopped, what is that? I didn't quite comprehend. Okay, John, I know what state is, I know it's sponsored, I know what does that actually mean? And that is something that really stayed with me. Like, who is sanctioning, these things? When you're talking about the Texas Rangers and you're talking about vigilantes and people telling the vigilantes or Texas Rangers, don't be afraid of what you do. We're not going to
prosecuted. So it's almost like it's open season. That was interesting to me.
Yes.
And another thing that was interesting to me is that, Monica has focused on some events, episodes, massacres that other people have. Where she was really breaking new ground for me was the idea of memory. All right, that just like you're focusing, it's like, okay, many people have spoken about Porvenir. How do people remember Porvenir? How do people remember La Matanza? All right, and a lot of people want to forget it, other people want to remember. In my article, and I hope I didn't say anything wrong, I said Texas suffers badly from historical amnesia, or they're really good at remembering things like the Alamo, but forgetting things that they don't want to talk about, like slavery or racism, or they don't want to get rid of mythologies and things like that. So can you talk just a little bit? I mean, I know you know about the Texas Rangers. What does the state-sponsored kind of terror? What's that all about?
Well, when you say state-sanctioned, I think of not really coming out and saying you can do this, but they do it and they look away. Mm-hmm. Nothing happens to them. As far as the Porvinian Massacre, none of those men were prosecuted. Mm-hmm. 15 boys and men were massacred by the Texas Rangers, and not one soul had to go to prison for that. Not one soul went to court for that. Mm-hmm. And that is state sanctioned. Mm-hmm. They said, hey, it's okay. We're going to take you guys out of your positions right now. They fired them. But then a year later, they were rehired. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that definitely says it was state sanctioned. I truly believe in that term. And it's sad that in today's time, we're actually seeing some of that in other states and in Texas itself.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about here with state-sanctioned violence today?
I can't give you. Los Angeles. I don't know. I can't think of one right now. I just know that. In fact, if you gave me time, I would. I'd find an incident, but it has happened. Mm-hmm. It has happened, and I don't know what you were.
Los Angeles, the police get to shoot a black man every single day. And they
yeah. Well, I definitely could. I mean, that's just a very simple one. How about George Floyd?
And the immunity that they have too.
Yeah, and, that's just. I mean, for the guy who killed George Floyd, to be the first one to ever be found guilty, what does that say to you? How many people in this country have died under police protection? And he's the first person since the beginning of time that was found guilty. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was state sanctioned. So that's just a very simple example. And there's just so many, many more.
Well, it's kind of part of the problem of attacking systemic racism, all the different institutions that are part and parcel to keep this kind of system going. And I often think of, kind of follow the money. Who benefits by keeping a system rolling? Why does this stuff continue to happen? I want to ask you, because I kind of share this so you'll understand my drift, not because I just want to talk about me, although that's very interesting. But the kind of idea as I get older, I really don't like wasting time. And one of the things I want to do is make an impact. When I mean, one of the reasons for talking about with you is really to, when I go back to teaching, is talk about Porvenir or La Matanza or state sanctioned this, or it was quite thrilling to talk at the the Alamo with different kind of perspectives. But I'm almost at that point, and especially making a documentary, it has to change somebody's mind, or it has to be distributed, it has to be disseminated, or I'm talking to 20 people on a YouTube channel that maybe saw it. And I think if we're tackling systemic racism, or your big dreams of the
I asked you what was your world that you could envision. I want to have the world know about this, and you are a chapter in many, many chapters that people know. Logistically, how do you move forward, do you think, in making, maybe that Porvenir is very dear to you? I mean, dear in the sense of relatives, and it hits home, but, other racism out here, to be a catalyst for change. I often think about Margaret Mead and a couple people, can change the world. But the object behind getting this documentary is to get people to change the world. I mean, I think it seems clear to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're talking about white supremacy that's been going on for a long time.
Yes.
I think you said that racism is alive and well. So how do people that don't want that, how do we collaborate? How do we come together to affect the change that we want?
Politically, we've got to go there. The Hispanics in this country overwhelmingly could vote in anybody they wanted. And the thing is that we've got to get them to the polls. We've got to start looking at what we can do as a unit. And that's a little bit hard for us. We've got so many that are just living day to day, trying to make ends meet. They're not worried about the government. They're letting the government worry about them, but they're not wanting to go out and vote. And that's where I come in. I'm one person, but I am very politically involved. Not only do I want everybody to know about Porvenir, but I am also fighting for today, what's happening today. And that's a passion that you have to have. And I have a group of people that are just as passionate as me. And it's our job to go out and try to get our people to start voting and get these people into place that are going to help us stop, if not get rid of this white supremacy. They were hidden for a while. They were hidden. They weren't pumping their chest out and saying, I'm a white supremacist, like they are now. They don't care. They're out. They don't care. Anybody, I'm a white supremacist. They don't care about, what you think. Where years ago, it went down into the tunnels. I mean, they weren't.
Well, I wrote about this, that I think Donald Trump got all what I call closet white supremacists to come out of the
exactly
and just go out there and say, I'm a white supremacist.
Exactly. They're not
made it very
scared. They're
comfortable.
not scared.
They're not afraid, and someone made it very comfortable for them to kind of come out there. So you see things politically as really a way to make change take place.
Yes, we have to do it politically. Just doing it the way, day to day is not going to work. We're going to have to get in there politically and fight with all our might to change things in America.
When you talk about that, when we were talking about right here where you live about gerrymandering, and I would talk to my students in the 1820s or 1830s, you can look at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, and you can see the discrimination there. And the idea is, how do we neutralize these individuals that are coming into the country? How do we take their language away? How do we make sure that they're politically impotent when they come into the United States? How can we watch the polls? And what's interesting to me is to watch I think it's more extreme in Texas than it is in California. It happens in California,
definitely.
but in Texas and Georgia, I'm reminded of people, politicians in Georgia, because as many of the African Americans like to go to church and then they like to vote after. It's something that they've been doing for a very long time, passing laws that it would be against the law to give anybody that was in line on Sunday and African Americans a glass of water. It was prohibited. You can't do that. So somebody that 3 hours in Georgia lined up, here, I've got some water for you. You can't do that. You can't do this in Texas. You find other countries are going. Another thing that I've had some of the colleagues that I've interviewed say that they are alarmed by is that many Hispanics, or an increase in some Hispanics, becoming very, very right-wing. And that's something that they see as an impediment, that they're going to, you're trying to mobilize people, and then some of the people are going, and that's probably a story for another time, why they're being, mobilized. in this situation. But boy, it just seems like I watch what happens in Texas, pretty much every day, and some of the stuff I just
You just can't believe it.
I can't get my head around it. Some of the legislation, and I think where it's almost like mocking people, like it's like the wink, wink, nod, nod. We're going to teach wink, wink, nod, patriotic. And everybody knows if you say patriotic education, you mean you're not teaching real education. You're not teaching real history. When Governor Abbott says we want to tell people what makes Texas great, and Texas exceptionalism, and we're the best state, and we want people to know what that is all about. I've also kind of focused with that. I think that the whole idea of the 1836 project is to show what white people did in the creation myth and all their achievements, and negating the civilizations that became for. As one of the things when you look at where I went for the Alamos, you're talking, San Antonio de Valero, 1718. In 1718, we had Spanish, we had indigenous population. As you go through, we're talking about Tejanos. And my belief is, and I'd like to ask you about that, if you start to include people of color, their stories, then you have to deal with those very thorny issues. I mean, if you want to talk about African Americans in Texas, then you're going to have to talk about slavery. If you're going to talk about the indigenous who built, the mission, who's buried in the mission. I mean, everybody comes with their cultural baggage. You don't just say, hey, we're talking about this. This is what happens. And I think you have to deal with it. Somebody also pointed out is that if you start giving respect to other people and acknowledge their achievements, you lessen the achievements of those people, those Texians, those Anglos at the Alamo. Hey, there were Tejanos at the Alamo.
Yes, there were.
There were indigenous population at the Alamo, and it almost seems to me that there's a fear that somehow the white supremacy will be taken down if we include different voices out there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree to the fact that if you start talking about other races that had anything to do with the Alamo, it's going to hurt Davy Crockett. It's going to hurt Stephen F. Austin. It's going to hurt. In other words, let's not talk about anybody else. Let's just talk about them. They're white, and we need to make sure that they stay like heroes.
They're exceptional.
Yeah, they're exceptional. They're great, and but I've read also where Stephen F. Austin, I mean, he was a racist. He was. And so you kind of look at that and go, yeah, let's keep saying how great he was. And the Indians, he didn't care for the Indians. And therefore, let's keep them down. Let's not talk about them. And right now, to get people to talking about them, we have to have people that will talk about them. And a lot of people are scared to speak up. Mm-hmm. They're not willing to stand up and say, hey, this is what happened. This is the truth.
I think there's almost a mystique about the Alamo with the people, William Barrett Travis mm-hmm. and all that would be taken away. And I really believe, I said earlier, follow the money. I think if there was more equity, I think there was more inclusiveness, I think that mythology would start to fall apart. And I think that's the mythology is the myth maker. These white people knew they weren't going to get reinforcements. They gave their last breath, and they fought for liberty, and they fought for freedom. And then you anger somebody when you start to I think they argued for the institution of slavery. That's and I have to be fair. Stephen Austin initially said that he did not like the institution of slavery. But in his own, words and everything, Texas will not survive without slavery because
That's right.
Texas has to be a slave state. This is it. So I think this is white exceptionalism, that the people come for the myth of, the Alamo. That's what they want to come and see. What is liberty all about? They were fighting an arbitrary, despotic government of Santa Anna. And then you start looking at, land grants for 10 cents an acre, no taxes for 7 years. How despotic was the government? Is that part of the ideology? Is that part of what people bought in? And I grew up with the Alamo mythology as a kid. I'm 62, so I said, I grew up with that. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get rid of mythologies because there's a place I like the frontier man, I like the pioneer, I like the independent person. This whole idea of throwing your rifle out there and dying, at the last, second out there. And I think that's really kind of, what the fear is. Now, my last thing I want to say to you, and then you can say what you would like, but I really like walking away from an interview kind of like with a 5-minute core, because I said, you graciously opened this house to us, and we've been filming all over Texas. We want to make an impact. What would you like to say, about racism today? If you focused on Texas and kind of moving, forward. Last night, as I said, when I was talking to Ramon Vasquez, it was about inclusiveness. It was this idea that, we're all human. We all made our contributions. There's a cultural sharing. I can tell you with my, Professor Tiarina, I never knew so much about Tejanos until I learned him. But he's talking about he said, you can't understand Texas without Tejanos. Whether it's barbacoa or whether it's the horses, whether it's the Mustangs. I mean, he talked about land distribution and water distribution and all the contributions of democracy and freedom and liberty, which we always want to kind of have a monopoly, on there. So when you look at that stuff, kind of moving forward, what do you think people should know from Arlinda Valencia? When I go back home and say, hey, this is the legacy, from us having a chat. What do you want people to know?
Well, number one, I want them to know that discrimination has been around for thousands of years. And when I was born, we definitely were in the time where discrimination was pretty, in my parents' time, they couldn't go into restaurants. They couldn't drink out of fountains because although you always look at that for the color that they had to have different fountains. Well, it was the same thing in Texas for Hispanics. They were spics, whatever. Even though, because a lot of people look at me and they go, you've never been discriminated against in your life. You're white. No. The fact is, it doesn't matter whether you're white or not. As long as they know that you are Hispanic, you will always be treated as one. And it doesn't matter what color you are. Yes, the color of the skin is going to get their attention first. But if they find out that you are, you get the same treatment. And as I was growing up, I found out how people really look at other people. And in Monahans, Texas, discrimination was definitely alive and well. And I suffered through it, and my family suffered through it. And to know that we suffered through it, then my grandparents suffered through it. My great-grandfather was murdered. You just keep going back. And as far as my genealogy, I have proof that we just keep going back and back and back. And it's always about discrimination. It's either the color you are or not. And people need to understand, if you don't think there's discrimination in this country, you're wearing blinders. Because that's what it's all about. It's about the color. And you need to understand that if we don't start working together and start helping each other to conquer this, it's going to continue the same way for many, many years to come. And I feel very strongly that all the all the people of color should come together and should fight white supremacy. We are not here to take their country away. We are here to become equals. That's it. We just want to be treated as equals. And I'm hoping that sometime before I die, we could maybe make a crack in what that is and try to make it a better place.
That's a great way to end.
I'd like to ask a question. The thing that struck me the most in what you talked about was that you guys are the vast majority, and yet you're not a voting bloc.
That's
How
right.
do you think you could address that in today's age?
We just got to keep trying. We're constantly calling people, getting them to go to meetings and organizing. And it's just like pulling teeth. It is. And
What's the problem, you think?
like I said, I think that right now the Hispanics are not, I guess you can say whites are more prominently wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
They're wealthy.
I think I could give an example.
You know?
I think in California, they really try to get out Hispanics for the census. And obviously we get a lot of money from the census, and so many people are scared to death.
Exactly.
Because when they go out, are they going to know information about me? Are they going to find out I'm illegal? It doesn't matter. If you're illegal and you're part of the census, there's funding. But people go door to door in California and say, hey, listen, if you're not signed up for the census, we're not going to get the funding that we need. But fear is a huge factor. ICE running rampant in California and elsewhere, but that was a huge part of that. I think it's that fear, especially I work with a lot of dreamers in my classes. I don't know who's undocumented and who.
Yeah, you don't need to know.
Yeah, but the reason I say that is the fact that when people don't understand something, they're making conclusions and they don't have all the information. But I remember that there was a real get out the vote for Hispanics and elsewhere, but largely Hispanic in Los Angeles, and fear was a major factor. And I think that probably goes a lot with respect to the goes on the polls. And you talked about gerrymandering and the chicanery. Gerrymandering is old as life.
Oh, yeah.
Where people figure out how they can, intimidation and violence and recrimination. Those are all kinds of weapons that are you're breaking the law. This is a violation. All kinds of things that are going on.
Did you know that Texas, because of the growth in Texas, the population, we got 2 new seats. We got 2 new seats, and so they had to redraw the lines, and that's where it came in, where they redrew the lines to where those 2 seats would be in the white part of town. It's not in where the Hispanics are the ones that grew in Texas. But they ended up shoving all of them in one area and gave the other 2 positions to the white populations.
It's. I think I laugh because I would cry if I didn't have a laugh. But you can see the machinations, the manipulation, the working overtime to make sure that they have, figure out how they can.
How are we going to do these 2?
How are we going to do this?
Yeah, and here in El Paso, they put 2 of the women, Hispanic women, in the same district. So one of them has to go out.
Yeah.
Now that is just wrong.
Right.
And then, like I said, they took out the El Paso airport. Not in our district anymore. Fort Bliss, not in our district anymore. And that is something we have to fight. Mm-hmm. We have to fight. But, Texas is, what can I say? Mm. Texas is Texas.